I'm going to stand up for what I believe to be right. And no matter what is thrown at me, I will go on standing up for what I believe to be right. Because I'm not going to stand here, sit here, and start going off defending myself. Oh, don't say that about me. How you could say that about me? I couldn't care less what you say about me. Boom, 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 and let them worry about me. And 30 years of my life has been kind of leading to this moment, certainly leading to this time. And I said to you in the last interview, and some people might have thought it was a bit of bravado, I said, I'm more powerful than them, and they know it. And within minutes of the interview ending, they were proving me right. Here they are, this cult that I will explain, that control the mainstream media. My God, has that been any more obvious than in the last few weeks? They control Silicon Valley, they own Silicon Valley. They own the corporations, they own the banking system. And yet, one interview with one guy, and this all-powerful, we're in control, omnipotent, all-powerful force is running around like someone shouting, fire! Gotta take him off this, take him off that, take him off this, take him off the other. And what are they saying, Brian? They're saying, you're more powerful, one man, than we are. And so we have to stop what you're saying getting to people, because we know the consequences for us of that happening. And you know, everything is a frequency. My voice now is a frequency. And mendacity, lies, deceit is a frequency. Truth is a frequency, a much more powerful frequency. And they know the power of the truth circulating because people resonate with it. And so if they are going to pull off what we're unfolding now, what we're experiencing now, and they are going to control billions of people, they have to control their perception. They have to. We are in the situation we are now because of mass human perception. Part of that perception is there is a dangerous virus, so I must stay indoors because the authorities are looking after my interests and they've told me that I have to, and if I go out I might catch this deadly virus and oh my God, we're all going to die. And that perception allows vast numbers of people to concede their uniqueness, to concede their freedom, and to sit in their house under house arrest, being told what to do by a handful of people. And the other perception is, I can see there's something not right here, but what are the consequences of me saying so or taking this on and challenging it? And that perception of what are the consequences for me means that lots of people who have realized something's not right, my God, is it not right? We'll get into that. Also sit under house arrest. And those two perceptions, they are the reason this is happening. Because when you break down the number of people behind this, in each country and globally, it is tiny. I'm going to explain how that's possible. And yet there are getting on for 8 billion people. There are 66 million people in Britain. The number of people that are locking down Britain are tiny. It's perception and fear of consequences that are making this all possible and are destroying the independent livelihoods of billions of people. And the greatest form of control is dependency. We need to come out of denial and realize that we are now living in a global version of Nazi Germany. No, they don't have the jackboots. No, they don't have a silly mustache. But the structure is the same. A tiny few people dictating to everyone else. And we will have a lot of people watching here, Brian, who will be new to this. And I'm kind of pretty much in a position now to go through a sequence of events and background manipulation that will explain in very simple terms how a tiny few people have pulled off a fake pandemic with no virus and convinced vast numbers of people that there is a virus and they are in danger. And giving up their freedom is essential to their survival.
And most people have a hard time to even conceive that there might not be a virus because they see the pictures of New York City, they see the pictures of the ICU, they see the numbers on the newspaper, they see the president talking about it. So most people would say, David, there's obviously something happening.
Oh, there's something happening, and there are people dying. But the shocking, he said, what? Can all be explained, and I will today, in very simple terms. But just some quick background for people new to this, because there's some background that is essential to understanding how this was pulled off. First of all, for much of the last 30 years, in my books, I have been pointing out that there is I call it the cult. There is a global network that works through secret societies and literally satanic groups that has a structure in place, which I'm going to describe. It's so simple. It has to be, or it wouldn't work. To dictate from a central point down into even local communities. The first thing to get across, as I explain this, current events are going to become very crystal clear in terms of why they're happening, is where does this cult want to take human society? And this is not something that's happened in weeks. This goes back a very, very long period of time. This is why people like Aldous Huxley in Brave New World and George Orwell in 1984 were able to predict current events, because this has been in the planning for a very, very long time. And if you can access that inner sanctum, if you like, where this plan is being projected from, you can predict the future real simple. Because if the plan for the transformation and the direction of human society is not challenged, if there's not an intervention by people to stop it, then it will happen. And so by predicting what the plan is, you're predicting the future, because the plan is going to play out. unless we intervene. And it is playing out, and current events are a massive advancement of it playing out. So where do they want to take the world? I've been describing this for a long, long time as what I call the Hunger Games Society, obviously named after the movie trilogy. And the reason I use that phrase is because where they want to take the world, and I will emphasize again, this is not me speaking now since the lockdown and the pandemic hoax. This is me speaking decades ago, writing decades ago, that this was the plan. And the Hunger Games Society is designed, if you think of a pyramid, to have a tiny few at the top. We call them the 1% today. And at the bottom, the rest of humanity, basically, in dependency, in deprivation, in poverty, and crucially, again, the word dependent upon the 1% for the means of survival. And in between the 1% and the rest of the population in this Hunger Games society, you have a, in the end, what they want it to be is a police military state, a fusion of the two. But a police military state which imposes the will of the 1% upon the rest of the population and stops the population challenging the 1%. Now, I've been saying over all these years, this is where they want to take us. And one other level of this, again, as I've been saying for a long, long time, is that this Hunger Games society would be controlled by technology. So we're talking about a fascist, communist, global society with an addition, that it is controlled by technology, which makes it what people call a technocracy, which is defined as a society not controlled by elected politicians. They want rid of all that, but by technocrats, by bureaucrats, by scientists, by medical bureaucrats and technocrats, by engineers and scientists, etc. And we've been moving in that direction very clearly. But what do you need more than anything if you're going to make that society reality? You have to destroy the independent livelihood of vast numbers of the population. Because while they're running their businesses and employing people and operating independently, making money, paying employees, you're not going to put humanity in totality in the bottom reaches of that Hunger Games society in deprivation, in poverty, and dependency on the few. And this fake pandemic, which I'm going to explain, has been employed for many reasons, but profoundly right in there is to have a lockdown of business, particularly small business, which almost in vast numbers will not survive. The big people can. To have a lockdown long enough to destroy the independent livelihood of vast numbers of the human population.
Why would someone who was a member of the 1%, who, take for example, Gates, with hundreds of billions of dollars, and say the 1% is wealthy, they have real estate, they have jets, why would they want more?
Well, because I think this is something we should get into later, because I can explain this. But this is not about money, you see. This is about control. This is about a complete takeover, not just of humans in the physical sense, if you like. It's to take over their minds and their perceptions directly in the end through connecting their brains, human brains, to AI, which they're already talking about, and they're already giving us a time scale of 2030. And all this is going on now. They're all stepping stones to that.
And why do they want to do that? Why? Well,
that is a big picture, which would be better, I think, a little bit later on, when I can get into all that. Who are these people and why are they doing it? Because it goes very, very deep. And they are hijacking human society. They're hijacking the human race. And later in the chat, we should get into that, because it's apparently far out, but less and less far out, as what we thought was far out in terms of this would never happen is now happening. But the point about, we talked about where they want to go. So how do they take us there? And what's the structure that allows them to pull off something like this global fake pandemic, as I would call it? If you think of a transnational corporation, the structure is basically the same, except that instead of subsidiaries in different countries, it's secret society networks and family bloodline networks. So you have a central point, say the headquarters of this cult, and it operates in the shadows. And it's dictating from the center. Then in each country, you have subsidiary networks of this cult. And their job in each country is to control that country's politics, government administration, what we call with control of the intelligence network, control of the military, and so on. We call the deep state now. We even have a word for it. I've been writing about this for decades. Now people are actually calling it the deep state. So you have these networks, and they are there to control the politics, government administration, major corporations, the banking system and finance, and the media, ownership of the media, to control perception by controlling information. And part of these different pyramidal hierarchies, with the cult at the top, include control of the medical systems in each country, control of health systems, control of the big pharmaceutical cartel, mainstream medicine arena. So this is going on in every country, with the central point, I call it the spider, dictating, just like a transnational corporation dictates to its subsidiaries, and they're all working to the same agenda, the same blueprint. And there's two mass mind control, mass mind perceptual manipulation techniques that this cult uses to advance its agenda. One I called a long time ago problem, reaction, solution, where you covertly create a problem, you get your unquestioning media, have we seen that or not in the last few weeks, to tell the public the version of that problem you want them to believe, and you want the public to be saying, in a state of fear and anxiety or outrage, something must be done, what are they going to do about it? And then those who've covertly created the problem and got that reaction then openly offer the solutions to the problems they've covertly created and blame someone else for. And there's another version of that, which I have called no problem reaction solution. That's where you don't need a real problem, you need the perception of one. Weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. There was a no problem reaction solution to justify the invasion with all its ongoing consequences of Iraq, there's a no problem reaction solution called human caused climate change, which when you break down the facts as opposed to the propaganda is absolutely unsupportable. And then we come to current events and a colossal of historic, unprecedented proportions, no problem reaction solution, the global pandemic. Each country has its own subsidiary network of the cult, whose job is to impose the will of the cult centrally dictated. And therefore these different subsidiaries can work as one unit, when to the public, they're different countries, there are borders, there are different races and political systems. Actually, at the cult level, there are no borders. This is vital to understand. Something else I've been saying for decades before this started is the blueprint for the global Orwellian fascist society, the technocracy, is China. I said what they are doing and what they've done, this has been in my books for years, they have had a fierce, vicious dictatorship in China for a long period. This means, unlike in the West, where until now, no longer, they've had to pay lip service to freedom and democracy and all that stuff. In China, what we want, we're bloody doing. And so they've been able, through simple imposition, to create and incubate the very society that this cult wants globally. And China is a technocracy. It's run by technology and by technocrats, to the point where there are millions of face recognition cameras in Chinese cities, and as documentaries have shown, they can find almost anyone in minutes through this real-time face recognition system. It is, in China, what they want the world to be. Now here's a question. What has the West become since this pandemic was launched? It has become increasingly China. That has been the plan all along. And where did this pandemic start? China. So let's start there. We're in Wuhan. Wuhan, like northern Italy, which was the center of their pandemic, is notorious for extraordinary levels of toxic air. It has, as a result of that, enormous amounts of respiratory lung disease, breathing the stuff in. So suddenly people start getting taken ill, about just under 200 people in Wuhan, and they connected at first to a wet market and stuff, strange things that they eat. But as Dr. Andrew Kaufman, who you, of course, interviewed this week, and I've been quoting for a long time, an absolutely forensic medical researcher who goes back to original papers and reads them, not secondhand. As he's pointed out, the Chinese authorities, I say this cult network, looked at these people that were taken ill, and they decided on no evidence, no scientific proof, that the cause of it was a virus. And what they did was take fluid from the lungs, I think it was about 7 people, and they looked at what they could find in it. And they found a genetic code, what they call an RNA genetic code, not a virus. As Kaufman points out, at no point has this genetic material been what they call purified to get rid of all the other material in the code and leave just the virus, which they say is causing this illness that they're claiming. And they could do it through a filtration process. They did not do it. And the point about this genetic material is it's found in vast numbers of people. And so when they started testing for it, and this PCR test that they're testing for COVID-19 all over the world now, as doctors and scientists have pointed out, those with the guts to come out, they ain't testing for COVID-19. They're testing for this genetic material that's found in loads of bodies, people's bodies. That's why so many are testing positive. They're not testing positive for a virus. So what happened in China, stage 1, is first of all, they started diagnosing this new virus they have not purified and shown to exist through symptoms. They would really struggle in Wuhan to find respiratory symptoms, wouldn't they? Just like everywhere. So they start saying that these respiratory illnesses that you find all the time in Wuhan were now this new virus. No proof. And so the numbers started getting up. And then they introduced this test, which is not testing for a virus, it's testing for genetic material that loads of people have in their body as a matter of course, therefore they're testing positive. And if you remember, there was this massive hype. They built hospitals in days, to meet, oh God, what's happening? Oh, we're all dying. When you actually break down the numbers now, the number of people who appear to have died from this in China are dramatically less than we were led to believe. So now the media eventually starts hyping this up. Ooh, this could come to the West, this could come to the West. And the numbers were going up in China, oh, we're all gonna die. And then starts moving westward. And this is the key to understand. This is the key to the whole scam. The Chinese reaction to this virus was a draconian, merciless lockdown. People locked in their homes where they starved, it seems. People pulled off the street. There was this draconian lockdown. And then what happened? Suddenly, the figures start to fall. Just as this thing is moving into the West, or we're told it is, the figures start to fall. Now, if you don't have a virus, but you are giving the impression that there's one through symptom diagnosis and a test that's absolutely useless and not testing for a virus, then you have control of the figures. You know, people have said to me in the alternative media, well, why would they not have a virus? Why wouldn't they just release a bioweapon, right? Well, if you release a virus that actually is real and it is deadly, well, immediately you release it, you lost control of it. And you have the potential of taking out lots of people you don't want taking out. Because although there's a tiny number of you at the core, you're relying on lots of compartmentalized people in the system to impose your will on society. You don't want to take them out. You lose control of it. But if you are creating the illusion of a virus through figures and symptoms that are other diseases, and through a test that is testing positive for a genetic material that loads of people have in their body and not for a virus, and if you are giving the impression that lots of people are dying from this virus because you're telling doctors, we'll come to this, and they've admitted it, lots of them, you're telling doctors that if they test positive for COVID-19, i.e. this genetic material, which loads of people have, then COVID-19 must go on the death certificate, even if they've died of lung cancer or heart disease, or they've fallen down the frickin' stairs. People who are new to this will go, that's ridiculous. No, this is what is happening, and this is what brave doctors that have come out are telling you. And indeed, you can see the legislation and the regulations. Do you know, in places like Scotland, it's the rule that if someone is testing positive for COVID-19, in other words, this genetic material, not the virus, and they die within 28 days, COVID-19 has to go on the death certificate. This is how they're scamming it, right? See, just after I saw that psychic a year later, I was suddenly projected, thanks to a television program, The Wogan Show, into a state of historic levels of ridicule. I couldn't walk down any street in this country without being laughed at, pointed at, ridiculed, shouted after. Going to in a bar, forget it. And here I am sitting here talking to you 29 years later, with enormous numbers of people looking at what I'm saying and saying, well, actually, what that bloke's saying makes sense. And I've gone from mass ridicule, where a comedian had to say my name to get a laugh, no joke necessary, to here, doing one thing, doing what I know to be right. Boom, boom, boom. You're this, you're that, you're that, you there. Boom, boom, boom. And that's how you do it. You do what you know to be right. And it has a power that can move mountains, can create things that you wouldn't think were possible. If you'd have said to people in 1991, when the whole Wogan ridicule started and went on year after year after year, what do you think about that David Icke bloke? They'd have said, his life is finished. Never going to recover from this. Oh, got mad. And now look at it. Why? Boom, boom, doing what I know to be right. And how we get out of this situation, how we get out of this fascism, is doing what we know to be right. And if enough do it, then the fascists who are behind this, whose power is only the power we give to them, it will be over, because their power is our acquiescence. That's all it is. I mean, look at Bill Gates. What an unimpressive person. But why is he able to run the World Health Organization and World Health? Because we give him the power to do so. This won't frickin' have it. And when we won't have it, and we're not, see, the currency of control is fear. This doesn't fear. I'll do this to you, we'll do it. I'll say this, say it. I'm going to do what I know to be right. That is an unstoppable force. It doesn't need violence. Last thing we need is violence. This doesn't do violence. But the power of doing what you know to be right and not in ever considering not doing it, if enough people do that, we take control back of our society from a tiny few psychopaths who've hijacked it. And we will inherit a society based on that and not on fear, which is what has controlled human society for about known human history. And, you know, I just have this message for this cult as I sit here. Deleted. I've worked you out, and now I'm going to sort you out. Take a bit of time yet, but it's coming. I've come here to sort you out, and I will. To be continued.
And we're seeing testimonials from doctors in America that are being pressured to write things on an autopsy report. They've never experienced that in their careers. He said, you always just say the facts, but we've seen these doctors in California and New York City and a lot of places that saying they're being pushed for this diagnosis.
Now, here's a question straight away. If there is a real virus, why do you have to fix the figures on the unbelievable monumental scale that they have? You don't. You have to fix the figures when there's a scam going on. That's why in the climate change arena, fixing the data has come to light so often, because they don't have a real problem, so they have to fix the data to give the impression that they do. In the same way, they don't have a real virus, so they have to fix the data to give the impression that there is one. Now, if we go back to China, so it was absolutely crucial, for reasons that will become clear, that when this thing started in China, that the Chinese model of responding to it, which was a draconian lockdown, became the blueprint for dealing with this pandemic. So immediately that started, and they had those incredibly vicious impositions by the Chinese fascist government. Immediately, the World Health Organization came out, and this guy Tedros, who's been on the payroll of Gates for a long time, the Director General, said, China has shown how you deal with it. And the World Health Organization is owned by Bill Gates. He's the second biggest funder, second only to the government of the United States. And again, if you think of this global web and all the different subsidiaries, the World Health Organization is one of this cult's fronts. It was created by the Rockefeller family. It's now run by Bill Gates. It's his personal fiefdom on behalf of the cult, because he's a cult operative. And this web also owns Silicon Valley. It owns Facebook. It owns YouTube. It owns Google, which officially owns YouTube. So let's look here at this connection. You've now got the World Health Organization immediately saying the Chinese model is the way to deal with this virus.
Because they dropped all of their infection rates and death to almost zero very quickly.
Ridiculously quickly, Brian, if it was a real virus. You had these hospitals built in days. Oh, we're all gonna die. Oh, well, we're shutting it down now.
Right.
It doesn't. So,
but the numbers don't even make sense.
They don't make sense.
Statistically, even it was being questioned by Trump staff, this is actually not possible to decrease those many cases to mean those many deaths. It's just not possible.
This is how they did it. So, as the figures were being manipulated to go down, as they've been manipulated to go up, by designating respiratory disease of vast numbers of causes, pneumonias, as this new virus, So you change the way that you count the figures or conduct the diagnosis, and suddenly they go down for this new virus. And they went down just as it was, oh, it's coming to the West. So you have this World Health Organization owned by the cult that says the Chinese lockdown draconian measures are the way to deal with it. And the same World Health Organization, which is why it was created, then dictates and leads the global response to the virus, and their blueprint is the Chinese draconian lockdown is the way to deal with it. Now, over at Silicon Valley, what do YouTube say? Reason I've been deleted. What do Facebook say? We are going to delete anything that challenges the official version of the virus that has been given to us by the World Health Organization. So the World Health Organization immediately is running the show on the fake virus, saying the Chinese way of dealing with it is the way to deal with it. And you've got Silicon Valley, owned by the same cult that owns the World Health Organization, saying we are going to censor anyone that challenges the version of events of the World Health Organization. This is how the cult works. There are no borders. So, suddenly, remember what I said about these subsidiaries in each country, and one of the pyramids, the hierarchical pyramids in each country they control is the medical system. And let me emphasize this. You need to control very few people directly to control these pyramids. You only have to control the people in the positions that dictate what the policy is going to be in the pyramid. You don't have to control knowingly large numbers of people. You just need the key positions. And so, for instance, it is no accident that people around Boris Johnson, in dark suits, never seen a ballot box in their life, who are directing the lockdowns and saying we must have the lockdowns in Britain, are almost to a man and a woman financially connected to Bill Gates. Fauci and Birx in America, who are the advisors of on the virus of Trump, massive connections financially to Bill Gates. And you'll find this in all the different countries. Bill Gates, and we can get to why as we go along, Bill Gates has purchased the entire global medical system, not least through the World Health Organization, which he owns. So these pyramids in the different countries, America, Britain, Canada, etc., their hierarchy, brackets, cult operatives, tell the medical professionals, the doctors and the nurses and the other medical staff, to diagnose COVID-19, which has never been isolated to show it exists, on symptoms. That was the first thing. So suddenly, people who had a respiratory problem or flu, normally get this time of year, was suddenly being diagnosed on symptoms as COVID-19. Well, Northern Italy is notorious for toxic air and lung disease, just like Wuhan. And the death rates in that area of Italy, compared with other areas of Italy, are fantastic. The last figures I saw, I think it was 2018, In Lombardy, in that area, a few hundred short of 100,000 people died in the year. The next region of Italy, in terms of the second biggest number of deaths in the year, was Lazio, 57,000. So you can see there's a lot of ill people in northern Italy. Suddenly, what was before lung disease, respiratory problems, and pneumonia was suddenly COVID-19. And in the aftermath of that kind of furore that went on in the media, oh, look at Italy, oh, it's coming to us, was that the authorities in Italy have admitted that their diagnosis of COVID-19 on death certificates was generous. That was the word they used, something else. The Italian authorities have also admitted, and you find this around the world, 99% of people who died, quote, of COVID-19 in Italy had 1, 2, 3, 4 or more other serious health problems, or what they call morbidities. So in that area of Italy was limitless potential for diagnosing and putting on the death certificate, which all these doctors are confirming around the world they're being ordered to do, people who are dying from other things. And this brings me around to this. What they're doing, this is part of the big part of the scam, is they're designating on the death certificate COVID-19 for people who have died of other things, sometimes not even related to, often it seems, not even related to a respiratory problem. But here's the question. What they're saying to us, this virus, it kills old people. They're the most vulnerable. And young people, well, they seem to be all right. Okay. So what we got to do is we got to protect the old people and the vulnerable. Who are the vulnerable? People with other health conditions, which put them, their immune systems under great pressure, but also there are other conditions that can lead to the end of their life. So we must protect them. Okay, so we must have a lockdown, destroy the economy, destroy the lives of billions of people to protect these people. Why is it that old people, in immensely greater proportions, almost totality, are dying of this fake virus and young people are not? Very simple. Old people have lots of other threats and conditions that threaten their lives. Young people do not. So if you are, and they are, creating the illusion of a virus on the basis of saying it's COVID-19 when it's something else, then you have almost limitless potential to do that with old people with lots of other problems that are going to end their lives. But with young people, they're not going to have those problems. So how are you going to say they've died of COVID-19 when they're not dying of anything? And so you have this division. This is why it's all been put on old people, because they've got all this potential to put a fake diagnosis on the death certificate. And they're doing it systematically. I'll give you another example here. Not only, and this has come out, this is not theory, not only are they telling doctors and medical staff that if someone tests for COVID-19 with this PCR test, which is not testing for a virus, it's testing for a genetic code that lots of people have in their bodies. That's why there's so many testing positive. If they test positive and they die of something else, you have to put COVID-19 on the death certificate. This is where all the figures are coming from. They are fantasy. So in America, underpinning this order to do it, you have a Medicare system. And this came out through a Minnesota state senator who's a doctor called Scott Jensen. And he said what they're doing with Medicare is they're saying to hospitals, we've got a new payment fee system. And this is what it is. If a hospital diagnoses someone with regular pneumonia, they get paid $4,600. If they diagnose the same person to have COVID-19 pneumonia, the hospital gets paid $13,000. And if they have a COVID-19 designated patient and they put them on a ventilator, they get paid $39,000, which explains why a doctor medic, as many have now, did a video on YouTube, and he's in his hospital, he's in a cupboard area, and behind him are all these machines. And this guy was saying that they're telling us to put COVID-19 on death certificates for people who are dying of other things. But he says these machines behind us, which had covers on, he said these are first stage oxygen machines. So if someone is considered to need oxygen, they have these non-invasive machines where you just put an oxygen mask on them. He said, when this COVID-19 thing started, we were ordered not to use these machines. But in his words, to let the patient crash and go directly on a ventilator. Well, that's another 39 grand. But the point is that not only are you getting the regulations and the doctors being ordered to put COVID-19 everywhere, even though it's not, they're even having financial incentives to do it on a massive scale, tens of thousands of dollars potentially for a single individual. And so they brought this fake virus to the West in the same way as they created it in China, through first of all symptoms, and then they introduced this PCR test, which is testing for genetic material, not a virus, which is why so many people test positive. And by the way, and just a quick point, another thing they're saying is, well, it seems that people aren't getting immunity to this virus. Well, there's two things to that. One, that means when we have the Gates vaccine, everyone must be vaccinated, even those that have had it, because you've not created immunity for it. Why are people not creating immunity for a disease? Because there is no disease. So how can their immune systems create immunity for it when it doesn't exist? And so they test them again. And they say, you've tested positive again. Well, of course they have, because you're testing positive for a genetic material which is part of their body, not a virus. But they had a problem. They needed to take the Chinese lockdown model to destroy the independent livelihoods of vast numbers of people. But because the virus didn't exist, they couldn't produce the dead people. This is why for a long time through this so-called pandemic, until the figures went up because of all the people who were dying because of the lockdown, not COVID-19, the figures were the same as other years. Oh, COVID-19, COVID-19, well, what's happening? And there was a wonderful kind of graph I saw where COVID-19 figures were going up, but at the same time, people dying of other things in other years, they were going down, right, this year. So it was obvious what was going on, re-diagnosis. But they couldn't produce the people who were dying to justify that this was a deadly disease. So what they did, and what they've done with human-caused climate change, is what the whole nonsense is based on, is they create computer models. And the computer models come out of, I would say, a notorious organization called Imperial College in London, and a bloke called Professor Neil Ferguson. And he, I mean, you know, you talk to people who've worked in computer modeling, and you hear what they say on the internet and stuff about it, and they say it's so easy to fix because what you put in is what is processed to come out. So if you put certain data in, the computer's going to process it, and it's going to give you a projection that's not true, but based on the data you've put in. So the reason that ice caps are still there and New Yorkers are not swimming down Madison Avenue is because it was all based on computer models to get what you wanted out to dictate policy and the direction of human society, and you do that by what you put in. So they played the same scam with the pandemic. They didn't have the dead people to justify that this is a deadly virus. So what they do is they say, well, no, they're not dying now, but it's coming. And so they produce computer models. This, if you remember, Brian, Johnson, who is now completely owned by these people, but at that time, he was kind of pushing back.
It's Boris Johnson, our Prime Minister. Yeah.
The British Prime Minister. He was pushing back. He didn't want to close the schools. It wasn't him that shut the soccer down, the football leagues. It was the football leagues that did, not Johnson. And then Professor Neil Ferguson, who has an unbelievable record of being wrong, came out with a projection from his computer model. Press enter. And it was that up to 500,000 British people could die from this virus.
I remember, and it scared the hell out of everyone.
And that up to 2 million could die in America, because these Ferguson models went out, not just Britain. Johnson immediately cancelled the laxative order, because obviously they were saying to him, Mr. Prime Minister, the only way to deal with this is the Chinese model. It worked in China, so we must have a lockdown, just like China, to stop this happening. And if you don't, Mr. Prime Minister, you're going to be responsible for all these dead people. Same pressure's been put on Trump in America, though there's a lot more to know about Trump. And so we had the lockdown. And the lockdown's been done in stages. It's got more kind of deeper, but they had the lockdown. So they'd achieved what the whole idea was, the idea being two major things. One, destroy the independent livelihood of billions of people. And two, keep the lockdown going in some form for as long as you can, and then say to them, as Gates has already said, I did mention he was a psychopath, didn't I? Normalcy will not be able to return until the whole world is vaccinated. So these are the two main things.